Welcome, everybody. Welcome back for those who were already part of the dialogue series #1. We are really happy that you could join us today. Bienvenue a tout le monde. Bienvenidas, bienvenidos, los que están acá en América Latina. So I think some of you might already know this dialogue series responds to requests that are expressed by TPP members or friends of the TPP. The objective of these webinars is to discuss, say, cutting-edge research, discuss best practices, stimulate sharing of diverse knowledge, and hear diverse voices about the topics that we focus on. This helps to foster networking and collaboration. It contributes to the, let's say, the co-creation, the co-design of approaches and pathways, and also to help us with collective work on this issue. And it is an opportunity to build capacity among ourselves, among network, among the community of practice members, the community of practice that the TPP has established. For those who were there or who have heard about it, we had the first dialogue on doing science and research differently. That was, I think, in July, past July, like 3 months ago. And now we will focus on transforming food system. It is actually the main reason why I think most of us engage in and promote agroecology, which is a powerful, I would think, and systemic way to contribute to transforming food systems so that they become more sustainable, more resilient, contribute to a healthy planet, healthy people and societies, and able to address these interlinked global challenges in context-specific ways. Sorry, it's a bit heavy, especially without translation. So it's quite a broad topic and ambition. I think we can all agree on that. So because of this ambition and this systemic effort, this requires efforts in many different dimensions, on many different fronts, at different scales over time. And most probably, most of you that are here today are indeed contributing to making progress on at least one of these dimensions or one of these fronts, or probably several of them at the same time. So we will be very eager to hear from your experiences, from your opinions, from your wisdom about this. And there will be actually ample upon the breakout group discussion that are part of this webinar. By that time, we really hope the translation will be available in French, in Spanish, in English, of course, because the breakout groups will be language-based if at all possible. So please stay with us. Don't disconnect after hearing the introduction by Fergus or the panel. Stay with us for the breakout rooms. Fabio, if you can put the slide, so we will basically hear from Fergus a number of steps that he has come up with by listening to many different people about how to tackle this transforming food system. And this will provide a very rich basis for further discussions. There will be first a set of panelists that will react to Fergus' proposal, and they maybe share different approaches. Then we will hear from your own thoughts. There will be results that Fabio will present about the framing survey. And then we will split into these breakout groups, as mentioned earlier. There will be reporting back and there will be some conclusions. So I think this is more or less how we will structure this dialogue. Now I pass over the mic to Fabio for house rules and for guiding us into the first part of this dialogue series. Thank you very much. And again, welcome to everybody.
Thank you very much, Bernard. I hope you can hear me and you can see my screen. So a bit of housekeeping. I guess everybody knows all of this, but let's run through it really quick. So please stay muted if you're not speaking. When there's a plenary, raise your hand to speak. If you're speaking, put your camera on. If you encounter any audio issue, please try using the chat or considering using a headset or swapping to cell phone data. Please don't bombard the chat. Use it wisely. It's a very strong tool if we can all use it correctly. Try to minimize any distractions. Turn off any notifications that might go beep when you speak. I encourage you to have clear and concise communication, respect everybody today, and if you have a specific question for anyone, please clarify this when you pitch your question. It would be easier for us to respond. I think now I will hand it over to Fergus. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and I hope we can fix the Spanish interpretation as soon as possible. The French is going well right now. I heard it. One last thing before I hand it over to Fergus. When we break out, as Bernard said, the breakouts will also be in language. So you can pick a room that will be completely in English or only in French or only in Spanish as per your preference. Okay, enjoy this workshop.
Okay, I hope everybody can see the presentation. I can see that the French translation is now working, and let's hope that the Spanish one comes up as quick as possible. I'm Fergus Sinclair, Professor of Agroforestry at Bangor University in the UK, and co-convener with Bernard of the Agroecology Transformative Partnership platform. So what I want to do is to give an attempt at a first attempt, if you like, at a transdisciplinary synthesis. A lot of the time, scientists are always trying to do analysis and break things down to understand individual causal factors. But the reality is that it's emergent properties of complex social ecological systems that actually determine food system transformation. And the reason that agroecology is coming to the forefront in debates about food systems is because we have interacting global challenges: climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, and hunger. And you can't deal with these one at a time. You have to look at them together and have holistic solutions. And that's what agroecology attempts to do across whole food systems. And the 13 principles, the Committee on World Food Security High-Level Panel of Experts in 2019 articulated, really help us to pinpoint how agroecology can do this. About half of them are concerned with sort of regenerative agriculture at a field and farm level. And then the other half are more concerned with governance issues, economics, social aspects, connectivity between producers and consumers. These are universal principles, but when they're applied locally, then we end up with a diversity of practice. And that's through co-creation together with the stakeholders who are taking part in food system transformation. So that means that we've got lots of different transition pathways. And one of the problems from an African perspective is that the primary sort of view of transitions in agroecology in the past was the Gleesman transition that starts from the idea that you've got high input agriculture, so the first step is to reduce inputs. In much of Africa, actually, the critical first step is agroecological intensification, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But it's trying to get higher productivity, but without damaging the environment and maintaining equity. So let's be very clear right the way through that we're talking about the transformation of whole food systems, from the farm through to what people are consuming and minimizing waste. What gets flushed down lavatories in cities ends up polluting the sea, as well as rivers and many other aspects. So it's really important that we're aware that we're not just dealing with farming, but with the whole food system. So the 5-step approach is trying to balance sustainable production and sustainable consumption, deliver fair trade and decent jobs across food systems, from the rural to the urban, and to link One Health, human health, and ecosystem health. And these 5 steps are not a sequential set of steps. This is not linear thinking, but a reinforcing cycle where one thing feeds into the other, and we keep intensifying the impacts that we're having with positive feedbacks from one step to the next. And we'll see that as we move through step by step. So the first is a focus on food security and nutrition. Now, in Africa, that's a bit of a no-brainer because uniquely on a continental basis, hunger in Africa is actually getting worse. So if we look at the last FAO statistics, the SDG indicator prevalence of undernourishment is actually going in the wrong direction in Africa. It's pretty static in Asia and Latin America, and not such an issue in the north. But we're talking about nutrition here, not just food security, but also nutrition. And nutrition, healthy nutrition, in that One Health perspective, is an issue in most countries and most places, whether it's obesity crises or hunger. So having a focus on food security and nutrition helps us to get going. And if we look at a global analysis of the impact of agroecology practices on food security and nutrition, about 78% of the time it's positive. And the more different practices at different levels that are adopted in any one place, the higher the impact, although the amount of evidence that's available is less for more complex interventions. So we're starting from a good point that agroecology can have a positive impact on food security and nutrition. And we should be measuring that, not just for farmers, for producers, but also for consumers across the patch. And we should be adjusting our food system transformation in relation to that. Now, what about agroecological intensification? Well, we need diversification to do that because you need a diversity of components that you can integrate and that you can manage in order to bring out ecological balance without having to use a lot of artificial, environmentally disruptive chemicals. The good news is that evidence over the last few years is showing that this is really positive. So this paper by McLaren is showing that you can get higher productivity with crop mixtures rather than monocultures, and where you use legumes, you can substitute for industrial nitrogen. And these are meta-analysis of long-term trials, 30 trials, huge number of data points, each of the trials at least 9 years long. So this is substantial evidence across Europe and Africa. This is confirmed in other analysis. This is a global analysis in Nature Communications that shows that with all sorts of different legumes, you can improve the productivity of staple crops. This is using legume rotations, and that's a global study across over 400 trials. So you might think it's a simple technology choice. Do you use biological nitrogen fixation or do you use industrial nitrogen? But the minute that you start thinking about that, what seems like a simple technology choice, it actually involves a whole sequence of changes. And if you want to use biological nitrogen fixation, you need crop mixtures. That means moving away from monoculture, and that completely changes the way in which you're farming. So it is transformation of food system, not just tweaking the system that you already have. And it's more knowledge intensive, requiring system change and supporting local people in innovating, because there's lots of different legumes that they can use, lots of different intercrops, and lots of different ways of managing these things. So it takes more local knowledge and innovation, not as simple as putting nitrogen from a bag. And that means that what we call options by context becomes really significant and important. Different species, different interventions are going to work in different contexts. So this is just some data from Malawi showing that 4 different nitrogen fixing trees, Gliricidia, Faidherbia, Tephrosia, pigeon pea, being integrated, produce different results for different farmers. So what we're wanting is not to look at the mean difference between these treatments, but for which farmers is Gliricidia working, for which other farmers is Faidherbia working, so we can see which options suit which context. And when we do that, we can begin to support farmers in innovating themselves with appropriate options. And there is also meta-analysis that shows that diversification, both at a farm level and for specific crops, does result in win-win outcomes for both productivity and the environment. And that's really critically important. That again, it's not so much a trade-off as actually, if you get the management right, if you can get that knowledge intensity in there, then we can end up with positive outcomes. Now, step 3 is all about markets. It's all about the value networks and really moving away from a sort of competitive value chain approach to thinking about value networks where you're as much concerned with cooperation and with the complexity of interactions that happen. It's not a linear chain. There are lots of interactions that are going on. And obviously what we're trying to do is to capture as much value as locally as possible. And so this interacts a lot with reducing food system and waste, which we're going to come on to in a moment, because some of the businesses that are used for recycling can be critical in terms of local employment and developing a strong rural economy. And very importantly, we need decent jobs. And that also means looking at the labour relations with more labour-intensive agroecological practices. And the critical thing is looking at returns to labour. And you can see here, for an example, in Ethiopia, that using Fade herbia as opposed to industrial nitrogen results in higher returns to labour and much higher than the default agricultural practice. Step 4 is reducing food loss and waste. And there's no point in us agroecologically intensifying to produce more if we're losing 30% of it in the process of getting it utilised. And it is about 30% that's lost. Around 13 is lost between harvest and retail, and 17 is wasted in households, in the food service and retail altogether. So critical issues, and we need to look with urgency at how we can reduce those. And a lot of this comes down to changing attitudes to food and how it's produced, processed and consumed. And this comes back to what people are consuming and whether what we're actually producing relates to healthy diets. And there's quite a mismatch in terms of what's considered to be a sort of healthy dietary mix and globally what is being produced today. So changing attitudes and allowing agency of consumers to express their preferences for more healthy, more sustainably produced and more equity produced food. So we come on to how you go about this, and there are a lot of recent advances in recycling and developing more circular economies that I mentioned feed back to the value network element. Black soldier fly is being used a lot to process human and other waste in order to then be able to recycle it either as animal feed or fertilizer. So this is avoiding the flush element, and there have been quite big developments, and this presentation will be made available to you. You can look up the papers showing some interesting developments in Kisumu, in Kenya, and also with black soldier fly, but also with a lot of other ways of recycling waste. Step 5 is to facilitate participatory landscape community governance across sectors and scales. And this is critical because if we're going to promote, maintain, sustain food system transformation, then governance has to work. And again, there's been a lot of developments in this, whether it's at a county level in Kenya, nationally in Kenya, Tanzania, many other countries where Vietnam, for example, where there have been big changes in the way that government policy is trying to support agroecological transformation. But the critical issues are often needing cross-sectoral operation, and that means quite often interministerial interactions in order to get appropriate sticks and carrots in terms of promoting agroecology. And we need to be able to financially sustain these processes, and payments for environmental services that are often driven by governance mechanisms can help to sustain it alongside value chain upgrading that we've already talked about, so that we get business models that are agroecological rather than degradative. And this brings us to this critical issue of the missing middle. There is often a disconnect between very ambitious national commitments to land restoration, to climate change, adaptation and mitigation. But something gets lost in translation between those national commitments and international commitments and what actually happens on the ground. And that's because we often don't have either the social capital or the policy instruments at the sort of landscape or community scale that's capable of managing the trade-offs amongst impacts of land use on different ecosystem services at that landscape scale that they're first manifest. And during the recent review of DESIRA projects in East and Southern Africa, people identified that the multi-stakeholder platforms that they were developing was one way of facilitating plugging that missing middle. So, to conclude, what we're looking at is whole system transformation, for which we need to understand how do different aspects influence what's happening on farms, in shops, in the transport of food, in the storage of food, in the consumption of food, in how waste is handled and treated. And if we look at what's happening today, then obviously we need to look at how that can change in order to create the sort of tomorrow that you're looking for. This example is actually from the natural farming program in Andhra Pradesh in India that a lot of African countries have been looking at as a bit of a model. And you can see here you've got enabling environment issues, you've got what you can do at a project level in the yellow there. You've got key drivers that are very difficult to change, like climate change and societal norms. And then you've got the critical outcomes that you're looking for. And that's what I want to say. And I look forward to a really critical discussion of how much this initial attempt at a transdisciplinary synthesis can help take us forward in thinking about food system transformation in Africa and beyond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Fergus. Now I would welcome our panelists to put their cameras on and our moderator, Matthias, to introduce them. It's very interesting. We already have some questions for you, Fergus. So we're tracking the questions. We'll get back to that in a moment. Over to you, Matthias.
Thank you, Fabio, and thanks so much, Fergus, for this really exciting presentation that sets us off for today's workshop. And thanks above all to everybody who's participating today. We have over 140 participants from around the world, and already we can see discussions, questions going very vivid in the chat. Wonderful. Now, we'd like to continue with a very nice panel discussion. As we're a bit short, rather than asking each panelist two questions, I would like to ask a single question each and to introduce each of the panelists as we go along. So let me start off with my good friend Rosina Mbenya, who is the country coordinator for participatory ecological land use management, in short PELUM, Kenya, a key member of the Intersectoral Forum on Agrobiodiversity and Agroecology in Kenya, one of those multi-stakeholder platforms that Fergus was referring to in his missing middle. And also, together with many colleagues, very strongly involved in developing the National Agroecology Strategy in Kenya. Rosina, when you've heard Fergus' presentation about this 5-step approach, what are your initial reactions and how do you feel this relates to the processes you are involved in, above all the ISFA and the National Agroecology Strategy in Kenya?
Thank you so much, Matthias and Fergus, for the nice presentation, and greetings, everyone. The presentation has made me reflect and feel that, one, we have interconnected challenges, because he also started with the triple challenges that are interconnected on land, water, degradation, broken food system, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And I was thinking that all we need to do is to work together as stakeholders and not in a kind of isolated work. And reflecting on the issue of the 5-step approach, this is a powerful approach and a step towards the right direction. And I'm happy first it also puts the smallholder farmers at the concern. It also talked about empowering smallholder farmers. That is what, as Pelham Kenya, we are focusing on. And also looking at the issue of the healthy diets and food security that you talked about. Actually, it's important to appreciate and bring to the speed that food security is all about sufficient and nutritious foods for all. And this is a core aspect of agroecology, because we are talking of healthy foods. And more importantly to me is making it a human right, that is our foods through supporting indigenous foods and processes, so that it's everyone's right to have these kind of healthy diets, and having equal diets that are sustainably available, that are generally supporting the development of growth parameter and for all kinds of individuals. The other aspect for me is the of food and loss, and issue that is becoming a top issue actually. But agroecology brings in a solution whereby even some of food waste, in as much as we continue to create awareness for sustainable and responsible consumption, some of these waste, eventually we have to have them maybe in the markets, because some of this agricultural food will not be used entirely. And agroecology brings in some of the circular economy principles, and I'm happy I've talked about some examples like the black soldier fly, which is now becoming a magic insect that is turning food into very good bio inputs on the farm. And also it's also a way of empowering farmers. And leave alone the black soldier fly, there are also these like vermicompost practices and even the traditional compost practices that are able to support transition, making the food waste into use. In terms of the landscape approach, I think this is the next, or this is something that we all need to think about, because we have to move from talking about an individual farmer in a village, but move into talking a whole village that has been transformed and a whole landscape. It's a big issue, and we have to move towards that. And I see a great role policies which I talk about the role of networks. In Pelham Kenya, we have also seen the power of networks, and as you all know, agroecology is also about movement building and not working in isolation, working in a coordinated approach, being part of multi stakeholders, and being able to all together work in a way that we are not replicating or duplicating others' role. And looking at coalitions, stakeholder platform, like in Kenya, we have what we call the Intersectoral Forum for Agroecology and Agrobiodiversity, which has been a tool in transforming food systems in Kenya, seeing the great work of policy work and other work that through ISFA we have been able to, as a country, achieve. And finally is the community governance. And as I look at community governance, I see that there is for continued favorable and enabling environment that continues to give these smallholder farmers that we are talking about a good environment that they can work on, that also gives that political will, that also ensures that we don't only come with strategies. Say in Kenya, we have the draft National Agroecology Strategy, which I'll talk in detail just shortly. But we have these many policies in Africa and elsewhere, and the biggest question is implementation. I would like to challenge all of us, even as we come up with some of these strategies and policies. How do we ensure accountability? How do we ensure we have clear reporting mechanisms? Celebrate many policies being in the food system, but the communities they have to play this critical role. We have to support grassroots community to be aware. If you look at the case of Kenya, when we had this GMO issue that came up about in some years back, just a few years ago, it's the grassroots communities that were well aware that there's a ban on GMO that made a lot of grassroots noise, or if I can call noise, that alerted everyone that the country was yet to go in the wrong direction. And that created power and muscle in as much as networks and civil society organizations were doing a lot of effort. The grassroots community who are well aware about their rights are the ones which saved Kenya from such decisions. And in Kenya, I've just mentioned that you have the draft agroecology strategy, and it has 5 key approaches, which I'll quickly touch on. One of them being productivity. And this clearly sits within the approach of diversification. And one of the key things we want to look at our country is how do we support actions like soil health, because our soils have been degraded. We have also had very, very acidic soils. And I think even as we intensify, we have to start with the soil. If we have to build on the strong soils. And I'm happy you have given very strong examples of the legumes and the research that is coming out, and even other practices that can support some of these soil health practices like agroforestry, so that we don't have to start it off from a point that we have to work in parallel systems. I am a believer that even as we launch this agroecology strategy in Kenya in November, we can fully transition without having to work with 2 systems in parallel. And I've seen farmers who have told me that the moment they made a decision to transition to agroecology, or sometimes we confuse it with organic agriculture, they made that decision at a go. And I think that is a key message that we need to pass, so that we don't have that confusion that agroecology is not possible. It is possible. The other part is that is mentioned in our national agroecology strategy is issue of access and consumption to safe, diverse, and healthy diets. Basically, as Pelham Kenya, we have even had consumer awareness campaigns. We have what we call the Green Action Week, which we have since 2014. We have every World Food Day. We have been making consumers aware on the rights to have healthy diets, to have healthy consumption habits, and so on. So we need. This is anchored in our national agroecology strategy, and the stakeholders, we have to support this move so that it's all about, yes, sustainable production, but at the same time, we are contributing to the economic aspects of the country through reduced health cases, through improved nutrition, and being able to have diverse foods, which are also indigenous and nutritious. We have one of our Pelham chapters, Pelham Tanzania, they did a study comparison between indigenous maize and now the hybrid and various kinds of maize in the market. And the study came out that the indigenous varieties of maize were more nutritious, that they were more nutritious than these other new kinds of seeds. And the farmers have had these seeds for many, many years. We had a big seed fair last month in Arusha, and we could see the diverse kind of seeds that farmers had. And for sure, the farmers who have been saving such kind of seeds, they know the importance, and they know how they are important because they have passed them generations to generation. So if we support such practices, they will be very good. And the other aspect that I'm summing up, not good, but the other aspect is the weak policy and institutional environments. I think that's one of the areas our strategy focuses on, and ideally looking at what are the areas that as a country we need to support, increased budgets, and even our governments taking the agroecology agenda ahead, even counties being able to devolve and have in their strategies. And the other aspect, the fourth one, is the limited agroecology approaches in research, curriculum, and practice. We have had the challenge and the question is ask agroecology feed the world. It's because the research that has been done for years and centuries has not been favoring our side of agroecology. And I'm happy some of the research like what Fergus has shared is now showcasing, and farmers have been feeding the world ideally. So why are we getting this question all the time? So we want to have more research, even in curriculums being able to integrate this kind of agroecological approaches and practices, and we will not be having that continuous question that we get to all the time we get with our counterparts on the other side of agriculture. And finally, very important for me is gender and social inequalities. We have to keep the talk about women, youth, and indigenous communities. I know Monica Yatori is here. She will talk more about indigenous women, indigenous communities, but I finish with that. And thank you so much for that presentation. Over to you, Matthias. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Rosina. What a comprehensive and still clear and concrete reflection on the 5-step approach. Very much appreciated. Thanks so much. And I think you've already dealt with many of the questions that also arose in the chat regarding power imbalances, regarding finances, etc. So thanks again so much for that. Now I would like to invite our next panelist, that is Lisa Fuchs, scientist on multifunctional landscapes at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT, and leading one of the work packages of the CGI Agroecology Initiative, one of those wonderful TPP projects that we have the pleasure of hosting, where it's all about co-designing innovations and doing that on a landscape level, engaging different actors. And I think, Lisa, I would like your general reflection on the presentation from Fergus, but also more specifically how you think that relates to the work that you have been leading in Kenya, for instance, in Kiambu and Makueni, and what we call these agroecological living landscapes and the vision to action approach. Over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fergus, for the presentation. As you know, I've been very keen on this, and I'm very happy that it is finally being discussed in the public arena. So just perhaps as I start with my response to Matthias's questions, I thought a little bit about the background in which this presentation and the framework is embedded. And I think it's really important that we remember that agroecology is really gaining in momentum, and a lot of talk exists around agroecology at the moment, but that there are also many different concepts and definitions, if you will, around agroecology that exist. Yes, we have a strong coalescence around the FAO's 10 elements and the CFS HLPE 13 principles. And then, as you also introduced, Fergus, we speak quite a bit about Gleasman's 5 levels in the context of food system transition, that present a somewhat linear process that includes incremental and transformational steps towards change. In the context of the work we are doing at the TPP, and also specifically within this CGR Agroecology Initiative, we work quite a bit on the 13 principles, or we use the 13 principles as entry points, which have helped us a lot to move away from practice-based approaches to really principle-based approaches that encompass a context-specific operationalization of these principles. So all of this is great, but it also means that the 13 principles present a lot of things all at once, which sometimes leads to stakeholders struggling to grasp both the broad lines of the concept, but also what it means concretely to take action. So both analytically and practically, people have struggled how to do justice to addressing all principles holistically and at the same time, but also to grasp the full broad domains of agroecology, what it really means to embrace this complexity and holistic nature of the concept in an intelligible manner. And then, of course, we have the issue with analytical tasks that very often we look at either very long assessments, or we look at assessments that then again take shortcuts and start only focusing on specific elements. Just very briefly, some of the things that I found very interesting in what you presented is that we're moving away from this transition-based language to a more transformational one that really looks at circular movements and embraces the interactions very clearly. I also really appreciate the focus on the African context specifically and what that means in terms of different entry points and different trajectories. And I also really like, you did not speak a lot about this, but I really like that the framework is articulated around those 5 broad major outcomes, including One Health, sustainable production, fair trade, sustainable consumption, ecosystem health, and the alignment of these different steps with these major outcomes. I think is very warranted and is very welcome. And you have always spoken about the importance of the 13 principles really being action or outcome focused. And I really think that the 5 steps together with these 5 broad outcomes really provide a much better broad picture understanding of what agroecology entails holistically. Then I reflected a bit on things that I wonder about and some of the things perhaps that I struggled about. And I say all of these things based on having looked at the framework, but in full recognition of the fact that there's always so much more underlying different concepts and so much thought going into specific elements. So one of the things that I struggled with a little bit is this question of the overlaps between different outcome domain steps and principles, and perhaps mostly so with the absence of overlap between some of them. And we have step 1 in the middle, which interacts with all the other steps, but we have the step 4, 2, and 4 that do not conceptually overlap, at least in the figure, and 3 and 5. That's one element. Then I looked a bit at how the principles are mapped to the 5 steps, and have struggled in some instances with understanding where the 13 principles are located. For example, I looked at principle 7 on economic diversification being fully integrated in step 2, whereas it might be interesting to look at diversification more broadly. I looked at principle 1 on recycling being clearly aligned, which is clearly aligned with on-farm resource efficiency in HLPE, which is mapped fully outside of the production system in your framework. I also looked at principle 8 on co-creation of knowledge being located between steps 1 and 5, while it is the most central, perhaps, and most fundamental principle among the 13 principles, and it being excluded, if you will, from the other steps might seem a little imperfect. And then there are some other elements related to the fact that I found it perhaps a little confusing that principle 2 on input reduction and 5 on biodiversity are between steps 2 and 5. So step 2, I see perfectly well. 5, alignment a bit more unclear, especially also since principle 3 on soil health and 4 on animal health are located between steps 1 and 2. So it's fairly technical, but I think what matters to me is that we are so clear on wanting to use the principles as entry point and as structure for how we deal with agroecology, so that I think we might perhaps look at how we can valorize the alignment with the principles and the steps more clearly to really make a case for the 5 steps operationalizing the 13 principles and avoid confusion. Then a brief point, perhaps linguistically and conceptually, on this, on the terminology of using of steps. One thing that is complicated very often, I think, is to combine this idea of process and interaction and feedback loops and synergies on the one hand with this idea of progress towards a desired state. And when I read the steps in more detail, I was wondering, for example, while you said very clearly that you're not proposing a sequential incremental approach, steps do allude to that somewhat. And I'm wondering, for example, whether food loss and waste should really be located after step 3, for example. I also wonder whether food loss and waste has a different quality altogether and might be included in what is now currently step 3, as opposed to being a separate one. Another point on these steps also that I thought about was this question of whether it is sensible to call step 5, which again, like the language of step 5, like the last step out of 5 steps, somewhat suggests that step 5 is the last step, which is focused on landscape governance. And it sounds as if the framework suggested that the end point, if you will, for agroecological transformation was at the subnational level, which might not be the case, and which is not the case, of course, but we might consider whether steps, first of all, is the appropriate terminology, and whether they should be numbered. Yes, or whether we have a possibility for finding a language that allows to represent this intended synergistic, parallel, multi-sited approach more clearly. Then a few additional thoughts about aspects that could potentially be strengthened. In my perception, it might be interesting to strengthen strong and circular local economies more clearly. I think that the terminology of value networks and value webs somehow does not sufficiently translate the importance of local and territorial markets, or the importance also of supporting a degree of polycentrality in markets. Another point I think that Rosina also addressed quite a bit is, I was wondering whether it shows sufficiently this importance of social justice and social equity aspects that are very prominent in the principles and in this operational principle on securing social equity, which encompasses 6 of the 13 principles, and which is really important also for a lot of the agroecology movements. But I wonder whether it is explicit enough in the framework. As I said as well, like this question of the role and of national and global systems change might also be explored a bit more. And then I was also wondering whether, since we're really interested in this action-focused and outcome-focused approach, whether we might want to reflect more clearly on not only on the domains of change or the direction of change, but also these vehicles of change, like means of implementation, if you will, role of policy, of finance incentives, of extension capacity development, knowledge systems, social organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So those were some of the thoughts I had. And just very briefly, because I know I'm taking some time here, Matthias asked me to speak to what we're doing in the Agroecology Initiative, specifically in Work Package 1 on Vision to Action. So obviously we do a lot as everybody else, but what we do is that we're really looking at how transdisciplinary processes can be fostered in the different countries in which the Agroecology Initiative is implemented. And transdisciplinary processes, as we know, should be problem-focused, solution-oriented, reflexive, and inclusive. So the question is how in large-scale research and development projects we can really embed these transdisciplinary processes, especially in a context where projects are very structured, have these work package-based teams, often with predefined domains and approaches, and also decentralized teams in many different countries. And so what we did in the context of the Agroecology Initiative is that we operate along two lines and we do many different things, but I'm speaking specifically about this engagement piece, if you will, and the food system transformation focused piece in a holistic manner. So what we do is we facilitate these agroecological living landscapes, which are multi-stakeholder spaces at the landscape level. In the Agroecology Initiative currently operates in 8 different countries. So we have different landscapes in these different countries that also entail different stakeholder configurations. So they are located at the subnational level, but these landscapes are not necessarily located or aligned with administrative boundaries. They are more defined by the functionality of the territory and are more defined by the use and meaning that different of these stakeholders bestow on the landscape, which is one of the elements that is important. The second point I think that matters is that while we have a similar approach in our different ALLs, agroecological living landscapes, we have different entry points. So not only different stakeholder configurations for these ALLs, but also different entry points. So in some of them, we build on existing spaces, and others we have supported the emergence of new spaces. And in some of these spaces, we build on common interests in terms of specific value chains. For example, we coalesce quite a bit around the milk value chain in Burkina Faso. In others, we're looking at entry points related more to social organization at various scales, such as a cocoa cooperative in Peru, or we are working, as Matthias has said as well, also together with Rosina with farmer training centers that are part of the broader Pelham network in Kenya. Or we are working with farmers organizations that focus more specifically on specific commodities in Tunisia. So just to say, we have these multi-stakeholder spaces that we have supported and whose performance we are supporting. But then with these multi-stakeholder spaces, we are facilitating this process that we call Vision to Action. And this Vision to Action process really wants to work with the communities and other food system actors to support locally led agroecological transformation. And it really focuses on how to be able to mobilize different stakeholders to bring themselves to the table and to co-design and also implement different activities that are required so that they achieve the transformation that they're looking at in their specific context. Yeah, so what we do, and there's also a lot of insights into how it is possible to mobilize people and stakeholders to achieve these things or to move towards that. And we have chosen that it is perhaps most aligned with the agroecological principles to really be vision-based, so that to really have a conversation and a process that allows us to structure conversations with these different stakeholders to how to move from a vision for the future to something concrete, to have concrete actions, which we call also this transition pathways, right? So the Vision to Action approach that we have developed, of course, draws on a lot of different participatory action research approaches, but it is basically a flexible action research approach that combines different steps, including the establishment of a shared vision for the stakeholders, strategic behavioral changes for specific actors, then how these can be articulated in transition pathways that allow to move from the current state to a future desirable state, realistic short and medium-term action plans, and finally participatory monitoring and evaluation of the progress. And just as final comment on this vision to action, there's a lot that has been done about this. There's quite some publications around it also on the CGR Agroecology Initiative website. And we're also finalizing an updated version of the previously internal guidance document, and also have a broader, much more summarized methods toolkit that will be published shortly. I have a number of other observations, but I think I'll hand it back to Matthias at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Very much appreciated. And luckily, the breakout groups will give a bit more time for engaging with these different approaches in more depth. So without further ado, I'll just quickly say hello to everybody who joined us. In the meantime, thanks a lot, everyone. We're in the middle of the panel discussion. You should be able to have translation in French and Spanish at the bottom of your screen. And now I'm inviting our next wonderful panelist, who I think is joining us from the Convention of Biological Diversity COP in Cali, Ms. Monica Yato, who is the co-chair of the Global Agroecology Coalition, and is doing so on behalf of the Indigenous Women and Girls Initiative, which you have founded, Monica. So you're holding up the flag for Indigenous people, for women and for girls, globally at this stage, and bringing agroecology to the forefront. Monica, now that you're at the COP, you're representing the Coalition on Agroecology with its 6 working groups. How do you reflect upon the presentation you've heard from Fergus, and how do you feel this relates to the work that you are personally involved in and that the coalition is doing, and what kind of suggestions, recommendations you have for further refining or sharpening it?
Thank you very much, and good morning from Colombia. It is a very beautiful country here, and just to mention some few words, I want to thank Fergus for giving us a brief of what you're doing. Agroecology Coalition is the voice of agroecology, peasant farmers, agroecology, people who are championing sustainable farming in Africa and beyond. And I want to tell this team that the agroecology movement is gaining momentum with a growing number of initiatives and organizations promoting sustainable and equitable food system. This is a movement driven by desire to address the challenges of food insecurity, climate change, poverty, while preserving biodiversity and promoting social justice. And out of the members that we have currently, it is amazing that recently we have grassroots initiatives, we have AFSA, we have Pelham Kenya, we have other big organizational movements supporting agroecology transitioning. And just to go to what Fergus mentioned about policy and advocacy, it is our moment to speak about policy. We cannot talk about agroecology transitioning without the support of policy. Currently, as we speak about UNCBD, we need to see what are the recommendations. Are the government willing to support transitioning? Are governments willing to support peasant farmers who are 80% feeding these economies? Also about knowledge sharing. How else can we transform agroecology? What about the growing generation of youth? Do we have a space for the youth? And I want to thank our member AFSA for taking the lead in bringing youth all over Africa. And this is a good opportunity for us to scale up agroecology. I remember when we started this movement in 2021, we were a few of us, and even when we were at COP 28 in Egypt, we had a minimal space for food system in pavilions, and currently it is growing bigger and bigger. And also we are having a lot of youths gaining and joining agroecology movement. So it is a big momentum for us, and we are happy that we are seeing this happening. And especially now that we cannot talk about SDG 13 and forget SDG 1 and 2. I want to go back to my initiative, Indigenous Women and Girls Initiative. This is a community-based organization in Baringo. And it started in 2019 when I attended a church service, and I realized there was a lot of conflict in the community. And being a civil society person and also an activist and a feminist, I realized I'm not doing well if I talk about gender-based violence, and we are not really addressing the root cause of gender-based violence. And to me, I cannot realize SDG 5 when we don't talk about SDG 1 and 2. Why are women being abused in the community? Why are girls being married off at early age? Why are women not taking care of their girls and seeing them through to school? So we went back to the box with my team and said, we need to talk about the problem tree. We need to really see what are the causes of this GBV in our community. And the root cause to me was poverty and anger. So again, what causes poverty? There's the issue of climate change. There's the issue of biodiversity loss. We are depending so much on livestock. And livestock to us is for male, it's for men in the society. What about us utilizing our small spaces in our compounds? Again, the issue was about what harvesting. So again, how do we make sure that we farm sustainably? Then we introduced now agroecology to a small number of church members. That was a group of 30. And as we speak now, we have over 87 farmer groups. That's about 700 to 1,000 farmers in Baringo. So again, to me, that is a plus. And also seeing how women and also men are embracing sustainable farming. And through this agroecology innovation and permaculture, we are seeing women who are doing farming have confidence in their lives. They can also even make decisions in community, some decision making at household. So again, how does that contribute to the economy of the society? So I want to mention some small key challenges that we have realized as Indigenous Women and Girls Initiative. And I think out of the context and out of other stakeholders, we can even see how better we can address land tenure system. In the community, especially in the Indigenous pastoralist community, women do not own land. The land belongs to the men. So again, how do we bring advocacy and also human rights perspective, rights to land, rights to food, rights to even women having an access to this land. So again, we still have a challenge of land tenure. We need to also talk to women to also negotiate better with their spouses. And how do we bring in men in this agenda of food sovereignty and agroecology? And another challenge we note was the market access, connecting the indigenous producers to fair and equitable markets. We are seeing a lot of brokership and also multinational coming into our villages, selling synthetic fertilizer, selling pesticides to our farmers. How do we challenge this? And how do we protect our peasant farmers from these multinationals? And also bringing the digital markets to our farmers to access these international markets for agroecology. We need also to create markets at our own constituency so that peasant farmers can get the best price for their products. And also there's a big issue of culture preservation. Balancing agroecology principles with cultural tradition can be a bit complex because again, from an Endorois community, an Ensamus community, a Pokot community, women have been socialized to listen to their men. So they need to negotiate on how to access land, even having that marriage certificate for them to own a land. So it is another cultural dynamic that needs to be addressed. And just to mention, out of that, we have opportunities that we can also venture in. Biodiversity conservation are often stewards of diverse ecosystem. Agroecology can help protect and enhance ecosystem. And agroecology to me is it's an English term, but that was a traditional way of farming. We need to go back to a way of farming where our mothers, our grandmothers used to farm. And also food sovereignty practices can strengthen food systems. Sovereignty ensure access to nutritious and cultural appropriate food. We need to go back to our millet. We need to go back to our sorghum. We need to go back to our traditional milk, mursik, everything that we used to eat before. And also, how do we bring our younger generation so that they don't, they are too into pizzas and canned chicks? How do we make them understand that we need to have a nutritious food that can sustain our bodies and also protect us from communicable diseases and other diseases? Also, empowering communities and indigenous girls and agroecology leaders can foster sustainable and ethnic justice. For me, I think as we speak now, out of 87 farmer groups that we train on TOT, we can now confidently sit and see them train other farmers. So we are looking at scaling up agroecology. We are targeting over 2,000 farmers in Baringo, and for me, it is possible when we have support from everybody, from also the county governments, from also everybody, that the Friends of Agroecology, we need to come together and support scaling up of agroecology beyond Kenya, internationally and regionally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. It's great to hear that enthusiasm. Let's make change happen together. Wonderful. Thank you so much, and all the best in Cali. As you are in Latin America at the moment, let's go just a bit further south and hear from a voice from Bolivia. We have Giovanna Carreño Rocabao, a very active member of the TPP's community of practice and the founder of the collaborative program on applied ecology. Giovanna, I think you would like to respond in Spanish. So for everybody to be able to understand the translation, you may want to go to the bottom of your screen where there's a globus where it says interpretation, and then switch from original audio to English. Then you will have the English translation. Unfortunately, there's no Spanish to French translation. So up to you, Giovanna, to decide which language you'd like to speak on. So, Giovanna, as a member of the community of practice and as a highly engaged agroecologist in Bolivia, what are your thoughts on the presentation you've seen from Fergus on that 5-step approach? How does that relate to the realities you're seeing on the ground in Bolivia? Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Matthias, and thank you to invite me to be part of this nice dialogue. I will speak in English because I understand about the translation to French. Well, there are many things to say. Maybe I will tackle some of the points that I consider more relevant, although maybe it's not all the picture that we saw. First, I want to tell a bit about the context of Latin America and the problems that we had, and this related to the food systems. As you may know, we have the last months huge fires we have lost a lot of forests with fire. In Bolivia, until now, we have 10 millions of hectares have been burned, 6 millions of forests, and then we have estimated the millions of mammals and in billions of insects, and we still don't know about the ecosystem process that we have been lost. It is happening until now. Of course, it is impact a lot in food system, and more importantly, is driving by commodities. So I think this is something that we don't have to lose in the powerful and the opportunities that agroecology can impact to change this reality. And it's happening not only in Bolivia, although this year it has been the worst of the last 10 years, or it's also happening in Brazil, in Paraguay, in Argentina. So it is being a big problem. It has to be visibilized, and all the things that we are doing, including the 5 steps, I think. So with this, one element that I think we are missing is the forests. I mean, we speak about agricultural intensification, we speak about always agriculture, but forest also part of the landscape, but I believe it is not taken into account as visible as it has to be. So one of the suggestion is, look how we can show this, that the forest is part of the agroecology, and we are working with this. In Bolivia, with indigenous people who have a lot of forests, they work with non-timber products, no? So this is part of also of the food systems, but it's not always within the good practices of agroecology or all these steps. Going to the first step about the focus on food security and nutrition. I think in this case, I will split up in 2 parts, as we were talking with Fergus days ago. For one side, if I think in our local food systems, the most thing that we are going through our ecology is because of the citizen, and and this is also something that we need to visualize in the actors, because in Bolivia, most of the changes are driven by the collector, the producer, the consumers, the transformation people. So it's really the citizen who is asking changes in the food system, and the policy is going always behind, and always try to catch up this, which is good in some times because it says is the consumer, is the people who is driving these changes, and this powerful of the people has to be also part of this. I don't know where, I don't have I will not say where exactly, but I think it's something very important. So in the context of Bolivia, when we speak about food security, most of the agroecology chances are related with good quality of food, not only the access of food, but also the quality. No, we are very aware about the agrochemical components on the food. So most of the time we speak about agroecology thinking in organic food. It is something we're trying to change, but there's also follow some studies that is the first step to a transition to agroecology, change to your inputs by bio inputs. So the first thing with the food security a local basis is this, and then we go to the other food security, which is related with the commodities, because on a global scale is also part of food security. And then we have to think how these commodities are, how we can impact to these commodities with agroecology approach. And that I will speak about the third step, which is develop inclusive value networks, because the commodities are going to markets outside Bolivia, but these markets are not into the more fair trades. They are not asking good quality of food. They are just buying the conventional food. So in this aspect, I think food security, I don't know, we need to think in this more global aspect of food security, how markets are driving changes in agroecology and local basis, but thinking in the products are going outside of the countries. The other thing that I would like to think is the trajectory of the change. We speak about the trajectory of different typology of food system will be different, and these are together with the landscape approach. I mean, when we see this landscape of soya commodities, soya crops, the landscape of this where these crops are most of them without too much diversity, because it's monoculture. So if we think in the transformation of this landscape, where are they going? What kind of markets they are going to go? Because the soya have to change to, I don't know, more diversified crops, and they have to look for the diversified markets. Are they related with this change? Because if you change in the production step, you have to change in the market step.
Thank you ever so much, Giovanna. There'll be more time to discussing in the Spanish-speaking breakout group as well. So I just encourage everyone to stay on. We're now going over to our last panelist, going back to East Africa. It's a wonderful pleasure, great pleasure to invite Janet Maro, the co-founder and CEO of Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania, or much more frequently, actually, just called by its acronym SAT. Janet, you have been working on ecological organic agriculture, agroecology, basically all your life. It seems you have such an immense knowledge from the grassroots up all the way to global fora, and you've been a powerful actor in developing the ecological organic agriculture strategy for Tanzania, one of the first of its kind in the world. Reflecting on the presentation from Fergus, how do you feel this relates to the context in Morogoro and more broadly in Tanzania? And how do you feel the national strategy in Tanzania aligns with those 5 steps? And where does it go beyond, or where does it maybe fall short in addressing some of these points? Looking forward to hearing from you, Janet.
Yes, thanks, Matthias, and thank you, fellow panelists. Thank you, Fergus, for the nice presentation. And well, the 5 steps, just to go straight to the point, the first steps are point on and spot on, if I'm to put it that way. And I like that there's food security and nutrition, not just food security, but nutrition as well, because always having enough food or a lot of food does not necessarily entail right nutrition. So it's good that it's food security and nutrition. And here, linking to the National Ecological Organic Agriculture Strategy for Tanzania, which was launched in November last year and became effective this year. Well, the aspects of food security in line with caring for the environment and ways that are friendly for the environment, and also the health of the soil being prioritized is very crucial. So this is also in line with the National Ecological Organic Agriculture Strategy. The aspect of ecological intensification through diversification, which is the second step based on Fergus's presentation, this actually aligns with all aspects of integration and multiple cropping in the farms, but also diversified farming systems. And here also the aspect of livestock integration in farms should be or is also part of this. And in agroecological systems, especially for the African continent, where you find that traditionally households have at least a chicken or a goat, or a chicken or a goat goes very well in line with the typical African household. So the integration and having the residues from the livestock used on farms gives a good benefit for households. And the manure from the cattle, but also the other products. I know, for example, for farmers who use all the residues from the animals in the farm, including like the bones, the hooves and horns from the animals that are used on the farms, but also the residues from the farm after harvest. You know, for example, after the maize harvest, using the maize straw to feed on livestock, but also to make products like silage and other feed for the cattle, creates a good circular economy and system on farm. Also for us at SAT, with the Farmers and Pastoralists Collaboration Project, you'll see that the collaboration between farmers and pastoralists, who traditionally used to have a lot of fights and a lot of conflicts, which were even fatal and deadly, or deadly, with the approach of using droppings from the cows that are kept by the pastoralists and sharing this with farmers who do farming, enabled the reduction of conflict and brought about a situation whereby there is dialogue and the two sides see that there are aspects where they can support each other. So the farmers get a dropping from the livestock from the pastoralists, and the pastoralists, after the farmers have grown the crops and harvested, they get the residues and use that for feeding the livestock. One might say, well, if we use residues for livestock feeding, then what happens? Maybe we don't have enough biomass for making compost. I can assure you that there's a lot of biomass, and the issue of making compost is a time issue. And here to make sure that you have enough biomass for the compost, but also the biomass that can be fed for the livestock. And I think the third step was the value networks for producers and consumers. And I like that very much, because oftentimes we tend to just like focus on production and improving the capacity, the capability of farmers to grow crops, to be resilient and all that. But what now after farmers have produced the products? We need to have farmers need to be able to earn decent earnings for all their labor and the work that they're doing. And it's important that consumers are aware of the value that the farmers keep, that the farmers put by growing healthy, nutritious, agroecological foods. And by understanding this value, also be able to demand products that are more how do you say this, more healthy, but also products from these farmers. And in this way, more farmers will be encouraged to grow crops, but also to continue providing ecosystem services. For me, I see that farmers who are doing agroecology, they provide ecosystem services due to the fact that they add back to the soil. They feed the soil by adding in organic matter in the soil, which provides feed for the other macro and microorganisms in the soil. It enhances the health of the soil, but also provides the fertility and also nutrition for crops that grow on the soil. And this is different than any other forms of farming, whereby what is added in the soil does not provide anything for the soil health or for the macro and microorganisms. So there is a lot of benefits that farmers are producing and are producing beyond the food that is produced on the land. Also, when farmers incorporate trees and they do agroforestry, they're contributing to sequestering carbon, and they provide other benefits in the area. For example, in Morogoro, we have the farmers on the Uluguru Mountains who are planting trees and protecting the watershed. The watershed is where water passes and goes to the city where people use this water. So they benefit with improved quality of water by just farmers doing agroecology, agroforestry, and incorporating trees on the farms upstream. So this value should be seen also by the consumers and also by the governments. And so from the farm to the table, and understanding this benefit and the services that farmers are producing also will enable to increase market opportunities. And also, for me to add on this point, the aspects of value addition, post-harvest handling and storage, and also marketing, transportation, and logistics to have the products in the market. And the fourth step on reduction of food waste. Yes, indeed. When you look, sometimes I read from the literature that the global food production, you find that it's so significantly large. But still, we have places where we have people who don't have access to food, and it's not far away. I'm glad that for us in Tanzania, we are a bit better off in terms of food production, though also that is different across the regions in the country. And we still have places where there's you go to the market and you find food is getting wasted because yes, either of oversupply or overproduction in that particular area. But then we have places where there's a lot of food shortage. But I think the food waste here is also the places where you have a lot of consumption, and where people also, people who are wealthy have a lot of disposable income, and they just buy even things that they don't really need, while somewhere on the other part of the world, there's people who don't have enough and even don't know what they're going to have for dinner. So here, a balance or equitable distribution maybe of resources, but also of the food would be necessary. But also, as Rosina said, for some of our local markets, making compost. Though I say making compost is a good thing, but if the intention was for the food to be consumed, then maybe we should at least enable a supply of this food so it can really be consumed. And the aspect of a landscape, I'm glad that this is becoming a topic more and more, because we should think beyond individual household level to the landscape and the whole community. For us as an organization, we are looking also at the landscape and the whole, like the community and the landscape inside the landscape in the community. And we believe that the small steps and small actions by individuals really have a big impact on the landscape. And so to have real transformation and real change which can be seen in a scale, we need to have more people who are engaged and involved and work together to create the change or to do things differently so we can have the change. And aspects, for example, of greenhouse gases emissions, especially through as a result of the practice of agriculture. And this is different at small scale level. Farmers, people often say they don't do so much, but I can assure you, for farmers who are not doing agroecology and who are not trained on the environment and the importance of environmental conservation, can as well do some harm on the environment. Tree cutting, also slashing and burning on the farms because they don't make compost after clearing the area. They do burning. This is not good. It does not provide benefits for the environment or for the area. So some of these small practices can as well be not good, and that's why we need to scale agroecology. And I acknowledge the beacons of hope and lighthouses in the continent, but also beyond, that are looking at governments that are really supportive and putting in place policies for agroecology, for ecological organic agriculture, and in this way to be able to have legal frameworks, but also putting in resources to support knowledge creation, dissemination, and also supporting civil society organizations that are at the forefront in helping to advocate, but also to support and provide technical support as needed, like it was the case for Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania during the development of the National Ecological Organic Agriculture Strategy. And there was the issue which I wanted to also emphasize: collaboration, co-creation, and working together is crucial. I had the aspects of multi-stakeholder platform. For us in Tanzania, it was the government, it was civil society, it was farmers, it was consumers, and really all working together. And there is a beauty in coming together and working together for a common goal and common purpose, which is ensuring healthy, nutritious food for all, feeding us and the growing population, but in ways that are friendly for the environment, and being able to assure that we are doing and making things better than how we found them. And we are not compromising the probability of future generations to be able to do farming and produce food on the land. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, Janet, for highlighting so clearly how agroecological farming practices are good for people and planet, but also that agroecology is so much more. Looking at markets, looking at the landscape level, looking at power relationship, and looking at policy aspects. Wonderful. So this has been such an exciting panel discussion that I struggled to interrupt people when we are slightly going over time. So thanks a lot to all of you wonderful panelists. Unfortunately, that means we don't have time now for questions from the other participants, but we do have the breakout groups for more intense engagement coming up in just a little bit. So just please, everybody, a big round of applause to Rosina, Lisa, Monica, Giovanna, and Janet for these wonderful insights. Thanks a lot, everyone. And back over to you, Fabio.
Thank you very much, Matthias, and thanks to our panelists for their excellent interventions. And thanks to everybody for your contributions in the chat. They're actually extremely interesting. I can see a very lively discussion. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to really go real quick and show you the answers that you have provided to our framing survey. Keep these answers in your mind as we analyze them. They will be extremely useful for your work when we do the breakout session in around 10 to 15 minutes. So I'll go really quickly. I'll put my slides back on. And so here they are. So as you can see, we analyzed around 400 respondents' replies. There were 4 questions that everybody had to answer. So it's around 1,600 opinions. So we're not going to go one by one, clearly. So I'm going to go extremely quickly. So the first question was, what were your expectations? And I hope that we are meeting some of these expectations. So knowledge sharing and learning. So you can see exchange of experience, insights into different approaches in agroecology and so forth. Collaboration and networking. I've seen some of you have been putting your contacts in our chat, which is wonderful. Bear in mind that you can all join our community of practice. It's free. I put the instructions in the chat, and that's another place where you can both do knowledge sharing, learning, and collaborate and do networking. So here also expectations on discussing policy to support agroecological transformation, understanding some of the political dimensions and public-private partnerships and multi-stakeholder approaches. Scaling and transformation strategy. I think this is really talking to one of the key objectives of today. So how do we scale up this holistic framework that Fergus has presented? And then sustainability, equity, and food security. Some of these, how do we really address some of these into our thinking? Some practical solutions, absolutely. This is one of the things that I encourage you to discuss in the breakout. There were other comments on insights in indigenous knowledge, agroforestry, soil conservation, and focus on the fragility of some ecosystems and so forth. So I guess this workshop will not address all of these, but it's really nice to see what the vast diversity of expectations. So then we go on the real questions, quote unquote. So we asked you, what is the most significant contribution of agroecology to food systems transformation, of course, in your opinion? And I think we can really relate to some of the things that the panelists have talked to today. So one is the ecological sustainability, and Fergus has touched upon this a lot also. So you can see the soil health, reduced chemical inputs, and increasing resilience and so forth. And bear in mind that these slides will be shared, so I'm going to go quickly, but you will get all of this with the recording also in the coming days. Well-being, clearly, so food security, but also healthy food, empowerment, and food and seed sovereignty. Socio-economic impact, so social equity, but also yields and increased financial profits. And I really like this point on intergenerational knowledge. I think that's really interesting. And I saw in the chat somebody talking about the need to keep youth involved in agriculture, but also agroecology and agroforestry, I would say. Also, then we have some paradigm shifts in policy. I think this is absolutely critical. And holistic solutions, I really like this point because it really speaks to our holistic framework. So really system thinking. Agroecology has this tendency to bring in system thinking because you cannot really do agroecology without it. So, and also very interesting, some comments were about connecting different scales of interventions and practices. So then we also asked, what is the most pressing intervention that can help fix broken food systems? So we're talking today about changing food systems. So where do we start from? And so again, here we had a lot of diversity in the responses, diversification and local connections. So really focusing on diversifying, but also connecting the local. Government and policy comes up all the time. And here again, we can see the shift in subsidies towards agroecology and simplifying regulations and so forth. Also, financial and technical support, interesting. So giving access for farmers to microfinance and so forth, investing in different extension services and also training on agroecology. And I think training is one of it's really critical. Knowledge empowers, and well, it's one of the mandates, I would say, of the Agroecology TPP is to help streamline scientific knowledge. So again, you are most welcome to join our community of practice where we discuss many of these things. Consumer awareness and demands of sustainability and biodiversity. I think that's also very important, fixing biodiversity loss and ensuring sustainability. Oh, I think I copied innovation again, but yeah, innovation. So, and then we also have community engagement, holistic and multi-actor approaches, and addressing climate change and land degradation. So a lot of diverse entry points or diverse thinking into what is the most pressing intervention. I think that could be one of the things that the groups could discuss in the breakouts. Because I can see there's a lot of different views on where to start. Depends also on context, probably. So, and final question we asked is, what are some of the biggest challenges standing in the way of this food system transformation? I think some of these have been discussed quite in depth in the chat. I saw many discussions on power dynamics, power asymmetries, and so forth. So economic barriers, we can see clearly, so link again to access to finance and markets. Policy regulatory constraints, again, talking about the hurdles of inadequate policy and lack of incentives. Research, again, so insufficient research, and I would say also insufficient transdisciplinary research, which by the way, was the focus of our first dialogue. Social and cultural barriers, knowledge gaps, again, very important, and one of the reasons why the Agroecology TPP does what it does, and infrastructure issues. And I saw this mentioned in the chat before, also a very important point. And finally, as I was saying before, power dynamics and environmental challenges. Oh, by the way, all of these are not listed in any type of order. This is just a random order, the way I categorize them. Okay, thank you everyone for your work, and apologies if we could only extend the time at the last minute. We thought we couldn't, but actually we ended up that we could. And Daria, make sure you put back the interpreters in the interpreting room. And yes, I would like to call on the facilitators to tell us who will report back. So I will start from our Spanish facilitator, Giovanna. So are you reporting, or is there somebody else reporting back from your discussions?
I am reporting, Fabio. We
Okay,
just
so the
started
floor is
warming
yours.
up, and then we have to come.
Yeah, I know.
will share my screen.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we couldn't cover all the questions, but I think we have nice ideas. I will read in Spanish. Where the first, where the strength, the fortalezas. It's fine if I read in Spanish? Yes?
It's perfectly fine, people. If you
Okay.
can't follow Spanish, there's the interpretation button. Just click on English and we will have the translation in English.
Bueno, de las fortalezas de los 5 pasos, pensamos que es bueno que considera un proceso circular y que hay una retroalimentación entre cada uno. Entonces eso ayuda a que cuando se aplique uno piense en que hay esa conexión entre los pasos, ¿no? También hablamos de que simplifica un poco comparado con los 13 pasos de 13, perdón, principios de la agroecología. Esto nos simplifica un poco y organiza, ¿no? Estos 13 principios. Aborda un enfoque, un marco holístico y no trabajar solamente en un punto, es lo que mencioné antes. Pero al mismo tiempo, sí, también alguien mencionó que también ayuda a no perder de vista ciertos los aspectos, ¿no? O sea, te enfocas en un proceso, pero también estás aware, estás pensando, ¿no? Estás ahí que tienes que trabajar ciertos los pasos, ¿no? Que tienes que abordar los 5 pasos. Trabaja las sinergias también entre los procesos, favorece la adaptación. Y bueno, simplifica procesos normativos al contexto nacional, regional de cada país sobre procesos agroecológicos. Esos fueron algunos de de las fortalezas. Mi grupo podrá luego tal vez decir algunas más si me olvido. Sobre los gaps, bueno, cuando hablamos de los gaps, más pensamos cómo lo aplicamos, ¿no? Este es un marco, es un concepto interesante, es un concepto útil, pero ahora hay que ver cómo lo aplicas y ahí empiezan a salir varios vacíos. Más que nada es pensar en la heterogeneidad y diversidad de sistemas alimentarios. Entonces, creemos que necesitamos desarrollar otros tal vez subpasos, substeps, pensando en subsistemas alimentarios que son muy contrastantes y que este marco como un todo no sería, no podrías aplicarlo, ¿no? No sé si piensas en paisajes llenos de cultivos dominantes o paisajes solamente con agricultura familiar o lugares con manejo de bosque, son subsistemas alimentarios muy diferentes. Necesitaríamos tal vez desarrollar subpasos para poder bajar esto a la práctica. No centrar la atención en 5 pasos, considerar los contextos para lo cual es aplicable. Lo que decía es hay que, si estamos con el tema de que es contexto dependiente, entonces hay que también ver cómo este marco podemos ir haciendo como submarcos y contextualizando, ¿no? Una parte que se identificó muy importante, que es algo general, es que el sistema alimentario, una de las fallas es que está fragmentado y las políticas, los apoyos está también fragmentado. Lo que trata la agroecología es de unir esos fragmentos, ¿no? Y eso no se ve muy bien en el marco, cómo el marco nos ayuda a no desfragmentar, pero a unir este sistema ya fragmentado. Demuestra adaptabilidad, como dijo, pero no visibiliza los escenarios de la aplicación, con diferentes escenarios, con contextos políticos, ambientales, sociales diferentes, cómo vamos aplicándolo. Tampoco vemos que falta poner un poco las escalas, ¿no? Es diferente aplicar el marco a una escala local, nacional y regional, sobre todo cuando hablamos de que de que es muy difícil unir consumidores y productores donde hay un productor en un país y el consumidor en otro país. Y sabemos que la agroecología es esta cuestión de la sinergia y de la unión. Entonces, en el marco un poco no trabaja cómo podemos hacer para conectar esos dos elementos que tienen que charlar, que comunicarse. Y bueno, es otra cosa importante es que hablamos mucho de agroecología, pero aún incluso con los 13 principios y todo, las visiones de agroecología todavía son bastante diferentes. Tal vez también necesitamos acompañar los 5 pasos con una herramienta que nos permita saber de qué tipo de agroecología estamos hablando, de qué en agroecología estamos hablando. De los ejemplos no tenemos ninguno. De los leverage points, como decía antes, es bueno conceptualmente, pero necesita herramientas para ayudar a operacionalizar y para bajar a la práctica, considerando esto, las tipologías, los niveles locales, territoriales y la visión de agroecología. Eso así en general y lo más importante. No sé si alguno de mi grupo quiere decir algo más.
Thank you very much, Giovanna. So now I'd like to pass it over to Lisa for her reporting back.
Can they allow
Hi,
me
Lisa.
to share my screen? Can you
Sure.
hear me?
Yeah, can you stop sharing, Giovanna, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Aquí, ya está. Okay, that's.
So just to say, we had a very interesting conversation. I have not yet managed to organize the points. Can you see my slides?
They're coming up. I can't see them yet, but okay.
Can you see them now?
Oh, yeah, I can see them now. Yes.
I think my internet is a bit slow. So we were in the Francophone group. We had 15 plus participants from various countries and a very lively conversation. As I said, I was very busy taking notes and I've not yet ordered them properly. In terms of strengths, and yes, we also decided to focus on 3 of the 8 questions because it was a lot. In terms of the strengths, we said it was a very comprehensive overview. It was appreciated that the framing is holistic since we all agreed that we need a landscape. We need a landscape and a systems approach. So it's great that the system context is an entry point and that the effects of activities are also reflected at the system level. And the third point of strength that we noted was that consumer rights and their role are very clearly reflected. And we all appreciated as well that it's very difficult to reflect on a framework that is just being presented, and everybody also appreciated that much more goes into what we see. I'd like to qualify that since we collected a lot of points of gaps and what could potentially be improved. So we had quite some discussions surrounding the importance of the governance aspect, and that it needs to be highlighted that the governance systems and personnel play an important role. And we also spoke about the importance of strengthening in the framework the role of capacity building at the community level, which is very important for uptake of practices beyond individuals. Some participants felt that it wasn't reflected sufficiently that agroecology requires a participatory approach through and through. We also felt, or some participants also felt, that farming was no longer very clearly centered, since none of the language included in the overview actually states something surrounding farming specifically. So there might be a need to include some language surrounding agriculture and farming. There was quite some conversation about the fact that inclusion and equity is not sufficiently explicit in the framework, and that it's easy to focus also on production and those who can produce much and more by falling. It's easy to fall into a way of dealing with the production question and forget about the others who need to be considered as well. There was a lot of conversation about whether or not it was appropriate to have steps in language, have them numbered, and most people felt that it does allude to there being a sequence, perhaps even a prioritization, and there was an interest in having that altered and adapted. Quite some conversation also about this importance of implementation and implementation vehicles or means of implementation in terms of, for example, also how policies can be implemented, but also how research can be disseminated to ensure that it is possible to implement some of these practices that are being promoted. There was an interest in strengthening the mention of civic engagement. And also that in the overview, the governance step was far from the ones that name producers and consumers as well. Lots of conversation about the importance of the private sector and the importance of financing of different elements of the transition as well. Yes, more gaps. Sorry, 1 second. Still also in the context of inclusion, quite some conversation about the importance of rural women and the youth. There was conversation about the question of how agroecological products produced is being priced, whether that can help to strengthen adoption. There was conversation, we talked a lot, you can see. There was a lot of conversation about whether the system transformation concept as such might have been simplified, and that there needs to be mention of equitable and inclusive networks of producers, potentially even included in step 3. Then again, conversation about dropping the steps language and look at where entry points are and look where the sustainable consumption and or sustainable production might be an entry point or real drivers for the systems change. Someone said that the approach was useful, but some details were disputable. Questioning where to start, the question of where to start is not well addressed, although that also juxtaposes a bit this idea that there shouldn't be a sequencing, but both opinions were voiced in our group. Then the last 2 points is that the economic rationales that underpin each of the steps, especially the farming aspects, are not well explored, whether or not the natural and financial resource base is actually present and how that can be emphasized. And then last point, still also about like more meta-level comment that the model proposed is opposed to the current model, yet the model represents a state where we want to get, but not how we're getting there. So there was an interest in strengthening how we can, the representation for how we can move from the current model to this desired model, as opposed to only representing the alternative model. And then very lastly, in terms of next steps, we discussed that it is important to adapt the model before it is scaled. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I think we're now moving to Fergus. He will make a good use of your work and the work from that Giovanna led So Fergus, the floor is yours, and take it on.
But it is not me. It will be Lillian.
Oh, okay, sorry.
back on
Okay,
my group.
I was
Lillian.
expecting you to do it. Lillian, please, over to you. You're muted at the moment.
Yes, all
Okay,
right.
great. Okay, great. There you
Okay,
go.
thank you very much. Yeah, we had a very interesting discussion, and yeah, so going to the strengths. So there's a lot. So this energy and enthusiasm around the approach of agroecology is really perceived as a transformative potential itself, and for the framework. And for the steps suggested, it makes it really operational and shows how these certain principles of agroecology can be perceived as milestones, a vision for transforming in different steps the systems. And yeah, also a strength is that there's a focus on sustainability through integrating enabling markets for agroecology and really looking into this many dimensions of agroecology, but making it like perceiving it as a transformation process with these different operational steps. And yeah, so of course the strengths of agroecology are biodiversity conservation, environmental sustainability, climate resilience, local knowledge integration, and agroecological practices, so that these different and very important sustainability aspects come together, and this interplay is shown in the framework. We discussed the gaps or some potential gaps. So, for example, yeah, I think our discussion was a mix on agroecology, like reflecting on agroecology, but also reflecting on the framework. So, one issue is the labor. That there's more labor demanded in agroecology, and looking into how can this be feasible for farmers. And one suggestion was that we need to provide more access to adapted mechanization, which is adapted to agroecological approaches. And
Lillian,
yes,
sorry. Can I interrupt you? Are you?
sorry.
Is this material on the slides? Because we can only see a static slide with nothing of what you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
Would be great.
Yeah,
Great.
for sure.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay,
It's
maybe
easier
I
to
will
follow.
just do
Thanks.
it like this. Okay. All right. So we are here now at the third point, linkages between diversification and community participation. So this
Lillian?
highlights, yes?
Now we're seeing the gaps limitations slide.
Yes, correct.
Okay, good.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Yes. So that these are really integrated. So raising the awareness of community, understanding the importance of diversification, then goes along with accepting more different products and also different crops, and diversifying in sense of agroecology. And one question is really important towards the framework is how can, because of course it's a generalized concept now, how can we adapt these different steps to very specific local contexts, including, for example, different soil types, climatic variations, and socioeconomic conditions.
Lillian,
yes.
could I suggest that you because I think it's going to take too long to go through all the slides.
Okay.
But since this group did go to the next steps, the going forward, maybe concentrating on that now would be better, because I think we're actually over time already, Fabio, if I'm not mistaken.
This is correct.
So I'd go right down to the last slide.
We will share this material with everybody, so don't
Okay,
worry.
great.
Yep.
Yes, so going forward, yeah, this framework gives kind of stepping stones, but it would be really interesting to dive into more examples and really giving more evidence about how this framework works or how this transformation steps work, and how this can be adapted to different contexts. And also then to look into context-specific barriers to identify how these barriers can be overcome and to find local-specific solutions. The interrelations, like looking more into the interrelations of these different steps might be an important next step to elaborate this framework. And then also, yeah, to really look, how is this approach different? What makes it special to specify it? And yeah, so, and then also really look into more the how. So how can we facilitate the steps, and then really elaborate each step, but also look into the trade-offs and synergies between the different steps, and perceive it as a collective learning process, and asking questions like, when we facilitate this collective learning process, who will be included, and yeah, asking this really how questions. Yeah, thank you very much. This is the summary.
Okay, thank you very much, Lillian, and thank you, Fergus, for facilitating. I think there is a lot of content that has been generated today. I'm not going to keep you up here. We're already over time. I'd like to thank everybody for having joined us. I put in the chat a link to a satisfaction survey. You will still get that link in an email. We will send a thank you email to everybody who's participated and who has registered for the workshop. And in a few days, you will get all the material. We're going to work on a recording. But I really allow me to thank you all for having spent time with us, for having helped us brainstorm on these topics. And really, this is the spirit of co-creation. We have a space online where this continues. So it's our community of practice. If you have not signed up to the Agroecology community of practice, don't forget to do that. It's free. And we're going to have a lot of other occasions to discuss similar topics. I see Bernard has his hand up, so you're going to close the session today.
I was not thinking of closing, but I think if people are interested in helping us move forward with the framework, using all the feedback received, it could be very interesting to create a small working group beyond the community of practice of people who are very enthusiastic about health. And I think it would be great to have a few volunteers from maybe different dimensions and different experiences. So let us know. Thank you so much.
It could be a group. It could be a group within the community of practice. So.
Yeah, that was exactly what I would have suggested. We can create subgroups in the community of practice where there's thematic groups. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want any last comment?
No.
Okay.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your day. And we will reach out with the material. Thanks so much for your time and inspiration.